Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to the E-Potibus Unum podcast. I'm Eitan.
I'm Dan.
And we're very pleased to welcome back to the podcast our guest host, Allison Green.
Hello, everybody.
And today we'll be talking exclusively about the wealth tax, what it is and why we need it. As always, you can reach us at epotibus@gmail.com. Please let us know what you like, what you don't like. If you have any suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. You can also tweet at us at epotibus on Twitter.
All right. The wealth tax.
The wealth tax. So, what is it?
Good.
So what is a wealth tax? We all know what an income tax is, right? It's when you're taxed on the amount of money that you pull in from, people who, say, work for a living.
Legal stuff.
Yeah, the legal stuff.
Yeah.
A wealth tax, or as it should be called, an oligarch tax.
Yes, please call it an oligarch tax, because personally, I also think that they got it wrong. I don't think it should be called a wealth tax.
Yeah.
Bad naming.
Yeah.
Oligarch tax.
It's an oligarch
yes.
tax.
Yeah.
It's a tax on all of your assets and income as well. So that's things like the stocks, wealth that you accumulate, art, yachts, private jets, Death Star, whatever you have.
Yeah, we can call it, or robber baron tax, whatever. You want to go old school with it?
And by the way, it's actually taxing things like arts and yachts and private jets.
I just said
that.
There's a parrot that flew in here.
That the wealthy have actually avoided. They have actually gotten away with paying no tax to be able to buy those things.
Right.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, no billionaire should be paying less proportionally than his secretary. And that's literally what happens all the time.
Right.
It's
There's
enough
Warren
is enough.
Buffett, right?
Yeah, well, he's the one who said it.
And then Obama took it on
But
as
that's
well.
the situation with most of them.
Yeah.
Right. And these guys are they're going and buying Monets with the offshore accounts that have never seen taxation in the United States.
It's just
the
like
hidden
the song.
accounts.
Monet, 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 Monet.
So who does it affect? It only affects a few thousand people. It doesn't affect you or me. As Paul Krugman said, this is for people who have more money than they know what to do with. The number of people affected can literally fit into a stadium.
Yes, but this is actually that few thousand people, and the people that can fit into a stadium is what we call the 1%.
Or it's not even the 1%, because depending upon which presidential
It's like
candidate.
0.01. It's really tiny.
I think Elizabeth Warren starts at 50 million, the 2 cents on 50 million. That's like 0.01%. So the 1%, if you're 1%, you start like 250,000, I think.
And the other thing is doesn't that group of people that can fit into a stadium cover like about half of the wealth in America?
Actually, I think it exceeds it. It's the top, I believe, 8 people on the Forbes wealthiest people. The top 8 is half of the wealth in America.
And basically, all of these people who can fit into a stadium can basically buy a country with the amount of money they have.
So why do we need a wealth tax? Well, unless you sell stock, for instance, it's untaxed. And that wealth is generally accumulated at around 6 to 8% per year. So without doing anything, if you are wealthy and you have a lot of stock and it's just sitting there, generally you will get 6 to 8% back on that without having to pay any taxes. That doesn't cover any of the other assets that we mentioned earlier. Accumulated wealth, by definition, does not create jobs. It can't create jobs. It is literally accumulating. So you can't spend it on investing in anything else. Another reason we need it is history shows that greater inequality results in either a police state, a revolution, or both.
Let them eat cake.
But now it's like, let them eat Twinkies or let them eat cat food.
Little Debbie. It's even worse. It's disgusting. But like in South America, you've had situations where people get abducted.
Yeah.
Sold for ransom. That's huge business. I mean, there's some countries where there's tens of thousands of people get abducted and held for ransom. I mean, is that the direction we want this country to go in?
No. I mean, I don't.
In South Africa, they don't stop for traffic lights in some places because they'll get carjacked.
The point is, these are people that are suffering under this kind of system where we have billionaires who have this kind of money. We have people in Chicago getting killed every day. You have those two mothers that were out in the street. They were part of, trying to make the community a little safer.
Yeah.
They got killed.
Yeah.
This is the world we live in.
Income inequality and wealth inequality. By the way, wealth inequality is a much bigger problem than income inequality. They're both really bad problems, but income inequality will not solve systemic problems as well as solving wealth inequality will.
They're two different things. They're like weather and climate.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of explaining it. So they're both very bad for the economy. They distort and undermine markets and hinder opportunity and economic stability. They lead to slower growth and deeper recessions, such as the Great Depression. So with a distorted market, it's not a quote-unquote free market, which is a bullshit term anyway, because markets are all artificial, they're all person-made. Then if the market is distorted, you say, well, that's just the market now. That's what the market is. Remember, the scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the free market and I'm here to help.
Oh, man, he took a thing, he turned around. Back in the day, another word for what you were saying before, the neighborhood, we used to say, it's fugazi.
So now that we live, and we do live in a distorted market times. I mean, people who are paid handsomely to literally distort the market in legal and oftentimes not legal ways. That's why the only people who don't want actual true capitalism that they always pretend to say that they do are capitalists, are the people who are doing this.
It's another big fallacy.
Yeah. And by that I mean like the laissez-faire capitalists that just say, hey, I read The Fountainhead and there should be no government, we should all be like Somalia.
Yeah, they don't want like a real free marketplace. That's why they go in, they buy smaller companies.
Right, because they're scared. Right, they're scared of the competition that actual free markets or regulated, I should say, that actual real regulated markets would allow, and the innovation that it would allow. It's why Big Pharma spends more money on marketing than on research and development, or why the giant oil and gas companies spend more money on eco-terrorism than on researching clean energy. They're old, entrenched, and sclerotic. It costs them money, a lot of money, to actually innovate, and why should they do that when they could just lobby? You have with investments, if you innovate, your return might be 3%, 6%, 8%, or whatever. That could be your ROI over many years.
That's not huge.
But lobbying has the best ROI. For lobbying for a large corporation has a 22,000% ROI.
That is huge. Huge, bigly.
And, we talk about this being a free market, but the reality is when you look at pharma and when you look at oil and gas, they're actually working behind the scenes to actually rig the pricing so that they're actually keeping competitors out.
Very good point.
There you go.
There's nothing free about like anytime anyone says free market. It's like Calvin Ball for people who grew up reading Calvin and Hobbes. If you haven't, then it's like playing a game that you make up the rules as you go along.
Yeah.
It's basically an illusion of free.
Yeah.
And in this day and time, what we call that is fake free.
Isn't fake free really oppression?
Back in the neighborhood, we used to call it fugazi free. That's a real, that's real shit right there. That's real.
Where do I sign up for this 22,000 ROI?
Oh, you got to hire a lobbyist.
You got to have a lot of money.
So what do we get with the wealth tax? Well, this can help pay for things like halting the climate extinction crisis. It can pay for infrastructure. It can pay for child care costs, public health care, and free college tuition. But the Repug Party and the wealthy don't have a concept of the common good. So just listen to what a libertarian, or what they really are, is an anarchist libertarian. Listen to their rhetoric. I'm not trying to get into a no true Scotsman thing, but Democrats generally wake up and look around the country and say, how can I make the lives better for my fellow Americans? Republicans look around the country and say, how can these people enrich my life for me? That's why they have party over country. They don't have these kinds of concepts of common good. And that's why they're welfare kings, because to real Americans, regular Americans, those of us, the 99.9% of us that work for a living, are chumps to them. And in their eyes, we exist only to serve them and enrich then. That's why they're welfare kings, and they take all of our hard-earning tax money. They believe that everything is a commodity or resource to be harvested.
Back in the neighborhood, people who worked, we used to call them chumps.
But the other thing is, I mean, paying for things like, like education and healthcare, we could actually afford these things. But what's happened in our country as well is that the middle class are the only ones paying taxes, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so we can actually afford these things if we could actually collect taxes. I think it was Vox came out and there was an article about the IRS admits it doesn't audit the rich because it's too hard. Mm-hmm. And apparently Americans owe a cumulative amount of $131 billion in unpaid taxes that the IRS...
I actually thought it would have been more, but...
well, that's all
they found out.
Yeah. That's just what they know of. And what they're actually finding is that a lot of that is coming from the wealthy, and the IRS has had its budgets cut, and they can't afford to go after this money. But if we were actually collecting the taxes that were owed, we can afford healthcare and education and to actually save the planet.
And I think that this is a great opportunity for messaging because Repogs have always said with the IRS, that's something that they can talk to anyone about. Taxes, the IRS are coming after you, blah, blah, blah. And anyone from the rich to the poorest will have a negative, visceral reaction. But the reason that they cut the budget for the IRS is not because they're coming after you or me. It's so they don't have enough people to come after the wealthy that are already avoiding taxes.
Yep.
Many, they are doing it legally, but then there's the part they're like, well, I could do this part illegally, and there just aren't enough people to get me on it. And if somehow they do, I have enough lawyers. So when they cut the IRS budget, it's to protect the wealthy. And I don't have the exact stat on me, but for every dollar that you invest in the IRS, you get, I think it's something like 10 or even 20-fold back. It's a large number.
That's huge. That is huge.
Well, ProPublica did another article as well where they found a person who is making $20,000 a year up until $400,000 a year is more likely to be audited than somebody who makes over $400,000 because it takes a lot less time, money, and people to investigate someone who earns within that range. Yeah. So they're literally set up to only come after us for the taxes, and that is partly strategic by the Republicans.
That's why we need to get people in power that will fix that kind of thing. The way to make sure that the rich pay their fair share, which they don't, is to actually, write it into law that they must, they must audit a certain amount of people within this bracket, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. So then isn't it incumbent upon progressives to explain that, everybody has to pay taxes and nobody likes doing it, but that cutting the IRS, can hurt your refund, right? Because there aren't enough people to process that if you are getting money back, or maybe you're overpaying. But the main reason is simply to allow a window for the ultra uber wealthy to slip through at added costs to us. I think another messaging that we have to fight is this insanity of trickle-down economics that somehow people still cling to after all of these years.
I've got news for you. I know a lot of plumbers, and I'm pretty sure that only shit runs downhill.
Yeah.
It's like trickle economics is we're getting shit, people.
It's just a theory that's never panned out. It's never been proven to work. It's just Republican talking points that, conveniently enough,
they always wheel out Arthur Laffer for some nonsense reason to spew nonsense, and then he disappears for a year.
It just happens to really help out, the wealthy in this country.
And so two stats that I do want to bring up: millionaires were 80% less likely to be audited in 2018
exactly
than they were in 2011. And
wow,
80% less likely to be audited in 2018 than they were in 2011.
Thanks, Trump.
And then, speaking of Trump, they have reduced the IRS enforcement budget by billions of dollars, down 25% from what it was in 2008.
I'm saving the American people money. Thank you.
Well,
Promise
no,
is
he-
kept.
He's saving himself money because, I mean, let's face it. Do any of us realistically think that Trump has paid any taxes since maybe 1970, if at all?
No, of
No.
course not.
I mean, zero.
So, I mean, it's just a simple, fundamental misunderstanding of how an economy works. And spoiler alert, I'm not an economist, but I am old enough to see how telling people that, just keep waiting for it to trickle down will help you. And that
sounds
if you tax
disgusting.
people, it is. And that if you tax millionaires and billionaires, then we just won't have an economy. And if you give them tax breaks, then everything will be great. The economy does better statistically under a Democratic president.
Right. So a lot of people like to talk about, if you don't incentivize business owners, the job creators with a lot of wealth, then they won't want to create companies and build wealth, et cetera, et cetera. If you tax them too much, they just won't do it. And there's this woman and her husband, the name escapes me now, but they won the Nobel Prize. And their work proves that if you do tax the rich, the quote unquote job creators more, it doesn't change anything. They're just as motivated to make money and just as motivated to create businesses, et cetera.
Of course, because prosperity doesn't actually come from, there's no magic, like this magical 1% that they keep hammering over us for decades and decades and decades. Prosperity comes from everyday people creating things, innovating, and buying things. That's where prosperity comes from. There is no such thing as trickle down. There's no such thing. So another reason that we need the wealth tax is because income inequality and wealth inequality is highest on record now, as Trump gave away hardworking Americans' tax dollars to his cronies to the tune of $2 trillion.
Hashtag GOP tax scam.
Wealthy people and the Republican Party, they don't trust democracy and they don't believe in democracy, which is why they will not invest in democracy. They do not believe in America and they do not invest in America.
Well, the other thing I want to just summarize too, when I think about income inequality, I feel like there's at least three different buckets. I mean, number one is that the Republicans have been working for years to change the laws to ensure that the rich can legally pay the minimal amount of taxes. So corporate taxes, for example, they're at about 11.3%, although somebody like FedEx actually pays zero and then goes and cuts out pension plans for all new employees. So, by the way, trickle-down effect, they actually went, and I think the year before, I can't remember what the numbers were, but they were paying billions or millions, I have to check. Billions in taxes,
I think.
the year before, and then they pay zero, and yet they still cut pension plans. So it's not trickling down. There's no excuses there. So number one, they've been eroding the tax system to ensure that they can legally pay less taxes, okay? Then number two is that they are avoiding taxes by hiding money all of the time.
Right.
So there's both the legal ways of not paying taxes, the illegal ways, which goes to the $131 billion that the IRS can't collect, for example.
So legally, in addition to the $2 trillion tax scam, there's another $2 trillion that companies hide offshore so they don't have to pay taxes on. And then they keep saying, well, if you give us a tax holiday, we'll bring it back. That's bullshit. Every time they've done it, all they do is stock buybacks and give themselves bonuses. There's no reinvestment. There's no innovation. There's no expansion. They literally just pump up their own stocks and their own
I mean, this
salaries.
just happened. This just happened in the past couple of years. This thing, in real time, we could see it not working. All they did was do stock buybacks, which is a major thing that most economists don't want those companies to do because it doesn't help the economy.
No,
it only helps that company.
Right, because the stock market, we talked about it last week, that, only 40 or 50% of the people have money in the stock market. So they're actually doing the buyback, and it's actually benefiting the people who are wealthy enough to be in the stock market.
So the thing about the presidential candidates' wealth tax, which I think is just Bernie and Elizabeth Warren right now, is it wouldn't even halt wealth accumulation or growth. It would just bring it down from about like 8% or even 6% down to about 5%. So you're still going to become insanely wealthy. You just will do it slower.
Yeah, I mean, me personally, I just see this as a prelude to actually taxing the shit out of them the way we ought to.
Exactly.
And the way we used to do back in the day.
So, in other words, taxing them and the way that normal people should be taxed based on the fact that Warren Buffett should not be taxed less than his secretary, but also collect the taxes that were owed because the IRS actually admits that they can't do it.
Yeah, they need to hire more people. Another thing that would stop a lot of the offshore stuff would be to make sentences like mandatory, if a certain amount of money is offshore and you're busted with it, there's a mandatory time in prison for this.
Well,
there have to be real consequences.
That would be real consequences or a very, very hefty fine. I don't want it.
Fines don't do anything.
But the other thing is, and going back to the hiding money, I mean, this goes back to legislation around LLCs, and this is actually not only are the wealthy actually hiding their money, but it actually creates a national security concern because there's all kinds of talk about the fact that the FBI cannot follow the money, and a lot of this illegal money is being funneled through, and they've created a system in order to hide their money, which also allows the criminals, the significant wealthy criminals to hide their money. So it's actually even a national security concern.
It is. And I think Elizabeth Warren has talked about that in her plans. I do not know of the other candidates if they have, but I know that she has.
It's an easy way for foreign countries to influence a lot of what goes on in this country.
Quick
Absolutely.
side note, a lot of that goes through real estate, particularly in large cities like New York. Hey, who was a fake developer in New York City for many years that could launder foreign money?
I know this motherfucker is not talking about me right now. I will destroy you.
Money laundering? I don't know who he could be talking about.
So, Allison, going back to what you said about who owns stock, the top 10% own 84% of the stock in America. The bottom 80% of Americans own only 6.7% of the stock in America, and the bottom 90 are an additional 9.3. So the next 10 are 9.3%. So
the bottom 90%.
Let me point out that this is another place where the Democrats need to do better about the messaging, because the reality is that the only thing that Trump talks about in any terms of success is the economy.
Well, it's the stock market, which they measure by the economy.
No. He talks about it as the economy, and we have to point out that it's the stock market. Yeah. We've said it a couple of times, but we need to go back and forth and continue to say the economy is not doing well. The stock market is doing well, which means that Trump and all of his buddies are doing well. And by the way, there's this thing called wage stagnation, which means that the average person is not making, the wage stagnation has actually started back in 1973. We have not been growing our wages for that long.
But productivity has more than doubled.
You know what's going on in this country? We have rage stagnation.
That's
our rage
true.
levels need to be taken up to 11, and we need to take these motherfuckers and tax the shit out of them.
Yeah, that's my point.
Okay, so what do critics get wrong about the wealth tax? Well, first thing that they get wrong is saying that it's not patriotic, it's not American. This is the most American thing that we can do. This is the most patriotic thing that we can do. Remember, we are the country that started things like income taxes, progressive taxation, and stronger unions. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said taxes are the price we pay for living in a civilized society. Also, 2/3 of Americans support this. I think that number would actually be higher if it's explained to them a little bit better.
Absolutely.
And that's what they're getting wrong, is the critics are actually focusing on one part and not mentioning anything that we're talking about here.
A lot of critics will also point to wealth tax's failure in Europe, but here's why they're wrong. First off, we have much greater wealth than who they were taxing in Europe. They would tax like the elderly that looked rich on paper but actually were pensioners because, maybe they had a house somewhere. There would be no exemptions, so you cannot game the system with lawyers and accountants. And we wouldn't have capital flight, which is when you say, oh, you're going to tax me, I'm just going to leave the country. Because first, to do that, you would need to renounce your U.S. citizenship, which has other tax implications.
Sayonara.
And proposals, again, such as Elizabeth Warren, said that she would tax you at 40% if you did that. So right off the bat, you would lose 40% of not your income, but all of your wealth, all of your assets. Critics would also say, well, look at the IRS now. We don't have enough people. We can't afford it. And the media, I have to say, gets caught up in it of whenever there's a proposal, oh, how would you pay for it? How would you pay for it? And never, ever question a tax giveaway to billionaires, to the American oligarchs and American aristocracy.
The answer to everything when they say, how are you going to pay for it, is let's start collecting taxes from the wealthy.
Well, let's start having them pay at least their fair share of taxes. One proposal was you can easily pay for it with 300 dedicated IRS agents. They make about $200,000 each. That's about $6 million, which is absolutely nothing compared to the trillions, with a T, trillions of dollars that it would bring in. And it won't be that hard to track assets because you have dedicated agents just for this.
Do you know, when we hear all of the candidates, I don't necessarily hear somebody saying, in my first 100 days, I would create an IRS tax force to start collecting all of this money that is out there that's not being addressed. They need to.
I think that would be great. That would certainly be a better question than the last question of the debate, which was, would you give a gift or apologize? That was literally the last question of the debate.
Give a gift? I'm sorry, what are you talking
I don't
about?
understand.
The moderator asked each candidate, what gift would you give to someone on this stage, or would you like to apologize for something? That was the last question of the night before the closing statement.
I don't know if you can see it. I'm rolling my eyes.
That's mad stupid. I don't understand, what the context is and what are they talking about?
Right. Nothing on guns, nothing on wealth tax. Okay.
Stupid. I hate when they do those stupid questions like that.
The last thing that critics would say was, of course, which we talked about a little bit of, that it would stifle innovation, which is just bullshit. Look at people like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and other innovators who created their massive empires at a time when taxes were much, much higher.
Yeah, and Bill Gates actually said, hey, I don't mind being taxed more. You can take $10 billion of my, dollars. That's what he said in an interview. Did you guys catch that?
Yeah, I heard something like that.
And I know he signed the
Giving Pledge.
The Giving Pledge as well.
But
I appreciate it, and it's unpopular to come down against the Giving Pledge, and I'm not against it, but I do feel that there are better ways to spend that. How about you, since you're a gajillionaire, how about you have politicians sign a pledge that says, if I'm elected, then I will pass legislation to make sure that all elected offices are 100% publicly financed and close all loopholes. That money can then go so much further when we have a functioning government.
My pet peeve, too, is it's kind of like a sleight of hand, because what they've done is they've set up the system so that they're saving, let's say, $100 billion in taxes, but they'll pledge to give away $10 billion, and it's like, I give $10 billion to charity. They want the round of applause, and meanwhile, we could have had $100 billion if they were paying equivalent percentages in taxes to what we do. When they take, let's say, 20, 30%, 40% of our money that are hard-earned money in taxes, we don't call it a giving pledge. We're not saying, oh yeah, we did a very nice thing and we gave you 40%. They're basically getting taxed like 11%. They give another 9%, which takes them to 20% as opposed to our 40%. Yeah. And they're saying, give me a round of applause, I gave to charity.
Well, and also they put it in trust so they don't have to pay taxes on it. But that's a whole other thing. Some of the problems quickly that we have is fake Democrats or more corporatist Democrats, people like Richard Neal, who is the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, has taken money from Repub mega donors like Stephen Ross. He's the guy who owns Equinox, and through that huge Trump fundraiser. And then you wonder why, even with a Democratic House, simple measures like this can't get passed.
Well, it's very simple. We're going to still have a wealth inequality problem in this country until we get money out of politics.
Absolutely. And Democrats have to start believing in what's right and stop shying away from articulating that. We cannot have these bullshit half measures.
Yes.
I understand that you don't have to be part of the Progressive Caucus. You can be a quote-unquote moderate Democrat.
Cue the music.
But you have to stand up for what's right and stop falling down on these half measures and being Republican-like.
Yes, be bold, motherfuckers!
Well, on that note, thanks. Thank you, everybody. That's it for this week. Please go to anchor.fm/epodibus We'll put it in the show notes to lend your support.
The notes are also most likely on the device you're listening to us right now.
Yeah.
So do that first.
We put a lot into the show, and we really appreciate anything that you can do. Remember, messaging is only half the battle. Mobilization is the other half. And one easy thing we can do is call our congressperson. We will have a link also in the show notes, but you could also Google, find my congressperson. Yep. And be sure to follow us on Twitter. We're at epodibus. That's at EPODIBUS. That's our email at Gmail as well. And as usual, we are looking for an intern or somebody to help out.
Anybody, please.
We would love any help that you guys can give, or if you or someone you know has something that you want to say, if you know politics, if you'd like to come on here and say something with us. Thanks.